based on the kind of stuff you want to do, you should make up your mind which of the two you want to become. Because for freelance work, if you want to be a freelancer, you cannot be a specialist. You need to be a generalist, because people are not going to, they're not going to hire you to just do, or actually for some specialists, I agree. Let's say illustration,
I was
motion
about to go
graphics.
there.
Yeah.
Around multidisciplinary designers, and how what is your experience around, like, does that eventually happen? Is it inevitable, or do you have to make it happen? And how is there any
Yeah.
benefit, any losses, and what does it even mean to be multidisciplinary designers? And most of us multidisciplinary eventually.
Yeah.
So
I
that's
would say as a designer, you'd probably identify with one of two types. You're either a generalist or you're a specialist. Most people, or actually every single person, is either a generalist or a specialist. And the difference is here. Now, a specialist, for example, would be somebody who's really good at, let's say, illustrations, really good at motion design, really good at UX research, really good at, let's say, visual design, really good at prototyping. But they don't do anything else. They only do the thing that they're really good at. And everything else they either don't know or they never do it. That's what a specialist is. A generalist is somebody who's sort of like a full stack designer, where you know all of these parts. Now, of course, even here you might have your strengths and your weaknesses, but in every single project, you end up doing all the steps involved. Now, depending on whether you're a generalist or specialist, the kind of stuff you do changes wildly. Or based on the kind of stuff you want to do, you should make up your mind which of the two you want to become. Because for freelance work, if you want to be a freelancer, you cannot be a specialist. You need to be a generalist, because people are not going to, they're not going to hire you to just do, or actually for some specialists, I agree. Let's say illustration,
I was
motion
about to go
graphics.
there.
Yeah. But typically you can't just do wireframes, for example. You can't just do low fidelity and research and be like, that's it. Freelance usually requires you to do like the full app or the full feature. Or even at startups, usually early stage or early up to mid stage, they usually hire more generalists than specialists. And only when the team starts scaling, which is like beyond, let's say when you reach 8 to 10 people, that's when you start hiring specialists. So based on the kind of work you want to be doing, you should make up your mind whether you want to be a generalist or a specialist. Um, of course, most designers are good at multiple things, but the point of a generalist or specialist is, do you want to do all of those things or do you want to just do one of those things?
Mhm. I think I love that framework and that vocabulary as well, and completely agree with that. Just want to cut it different way, which is, how I view it. Like, even to the path to being a specialist is laid down with being a lot of journalists a lot of times. In, sort of the only difference, therefore, in what we perceive to be journalists and specialists must be that your choice, and how narrow do you cast your net in sort of speak of what you want to learn. So if you just get heavily bent on, okay, I want to like really act as journalist and just talking about graphic design, right? So then you have to learn about color, type, size, different kind of mediums, right? So you'll have to be a generalist, a specialist a lot of times, and therefore in a larger, broader sense, being a generalist to just be eventually be a specialist, in something like a graphic design. And the same applies for, like, UX researcher who are consultants. It's they're far and few, but I mean, they exactly deliver that. At times just they all they do is just deliver research and findings of what they've done, and their agencies whom companies hire for that. But that bar is set really high, that you have to be really strong specialist. And that thing you're talking about of freelancer expecting end-to-end stuff also applies there. You can't just interview people and go like, yeah, I spoke to people, now where's the report? I mean, it doesn't work that way, right? It wouldn't function. So there are those sort of layers, like as you go, as the scale increases, like and adding the same point you're talking about, just turning it around, not of the team but of the problem you're looking at. That also warrants adding more specialists and adding more.
For sure.
Typically, two are related because as your company and the problem scale increases, you will add. That's when you will add people to the team. But that's sort of what causes it to happen, because let's say you're working in video a lot, right? Your company works in video a lot. Then eventually you will start to go towards designer who sort of have done that work and sort of specialize in that or are interested in that sort of field. So it's naturally tends to happen. But to get there, I think is important. You have to realize that you have, if you do decide to be a generalist, then realize that you will completely change domains, as you're working on. As earlier we're talking about going from graphic design to suddenly going to product design, right? That's sort of
Hmm.
a mind of a generalist. And then being specialist is doing the same sort of thing but in a very narrow window, right? And getting really like the same width and breadth sort of thing, depth sort of thing we were talking about earlier, that you see a variety first. If you like variety, then maybe being a journalist will be a great idea, where you know
Yeah.
something about everything, right? Or you go the other way, where you know everything about something, right?
Hmm.
So that's sort of the two ways you can go about it. And honestly speaking, like, naturally you will find yourself being in both. But what we're talking about here is, what does 90% of your time at work or in your work goes into? Like, is it switching context a lot of times? Then your job does require to be a journalist, or does it go into deeper into the same problem that you're looking at, right? Then your mind requires you to be very heavy specialist.
And
Yeah.
I think in general, there are, I mean, usually when people talk about generalist and specialist, they don't talk about it within design.
Mm-hmm.
Like they talk about it in terms of I can do marketing development as well
Right.
as
Right.
this thing. But if you're talking just about design, also the number of jobs, like this is something that if you're listening right now, you can quickly open a new tab, go to
Mm-hmm.
LinkedIn, go to jobs,
Mm-hmm.
search for product designer, UI designer, UX designer. You're going to find a few thousand results. You're going to find 3,000 to 6,000 job listings versus search for things like motion designer, illustrator, UX copywriter. You're going to find a few hundred jobs, right? I did this just today actually,
Mm-hmm.
preparing for our roundtable.
Oh.
But that's a similar scene in freelancing as well, which is more, there will be more people looking for general design work,
Mm-hmm.
lesser people looking for very specific.
Right.
So that's something worth thinking about. Like you can interpret that in many different ways, actually.
Yeah, I think that's a true, very good picture of the economics of the market as it exists. That the more you can sort of cover in the project, and the less, those sort of companies are more, or that sort of work is more out there in market than people who exactly know what they want from you, and they have got the rest of it figured out themselves. Those are far and few, right?
Yeah.
So, um, I think that's very well. I think that those are a lot of nice frameworks to sort of look at that, multidisciplinary designer point of view.